Hi, Liz. She was on. Dress up my house. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. Um, I'm grateful. I want to thank Jeff and Jody and Nora, that dear family that makes sure all of the technical things are done. And goodly numbers of people from 100 to 50 computers watch this. So everybody online, thank you. To all of my sisters, thank you. Don't tell anybody the truth about me. Great group. Jim Cleveland is under the weather today, but he's here virtually, Jim and Jan. And everybody else online, thank you for doing it. Let's just take a moment and thank God for another day of life. That it's a gift that we can be up and about, that we have people who care for us. Be with us, Lord, as we end our series and begin this week, which is at the center of our faith. Just a few comments. You can tell I taught school from last week. I want to just pick up a few things, if that's okay for you. And the little lady caught in adultery today has said she'd wait. She's figuring out where the guy is. We discussed a few weeks ago, we were prompted in a way by Father Rob's letter that he shared that a priest wrote the bishop of his diocese. Issues that have divided families. But today I also want to share another letter that will be made, that is available to you, that I think might help you, especially in family issues, when we get caught in this question of what's political and what isn't. On February 10th, Pope Francis wrote a letter to the American bishops. And it's online. You just go in, Google Pope Francis letter, February 10th. And I read it at Bible study last week. I think it is a piece of literature that will be helpful for particularly families that are struggling over some issues. And it's powerful and it's balanced. He wrote it before he went into the hospital. So I want to offer that to you. Just go and Google Pope Francis letter, February 10th. 2 weeks ago, my friend Kathy Powers, right here, that I've known, she was so good to the sister with whom I lived. They worked on aging issues. Kathy commented at the end of our lecture 2 weeks ago with the picture of the prodigal son here. She commented that the story was so male. And I said, indeed. And Liz said, where was the mother? And Richard McBrien, who I quote, wondered if the man had any daughters. It's just an interesting question that we can ask the text, did it make any difference? But we have to recall the first century context of this story of the prodigal son. And then that led us to a discussion of the view of women as property, and as the Middle Ages came along, how people explained the differences between male and female, and some came up with the conclusion, which I mentioned 2 weeks ago, that it took longer for a female fetus to develop in its mother's womb than a male. Well, it showed our very primitive knowledge of science, but it was a prevailing myth. And in addition to that, there was the belief that our spiritual side, it took longer for it to develop in us than in our brothers. And obviously, scientific knowledge was limited, but it affects the culture in which we live. And just a little brief thing for you, maybe you know more about this than I, that after World War II, many women came back from working and from serving and decided to return to school. And many women began to pursue theological careers and to write and address the issues of the role of women in society, culture, and church. And then Vatican II came along, and it was a turning point in the life of many women and in the life of many religious orders like mine. Because in one of the Vatican II documents, the bishop said to sisters, go back to your original founder or foundress. What did they want you to do? So I took a vow of poverty, chastity, obedience. And we have interpreted those along the way of what that means and our relationship with people. But most of us in the Sisters of Mercy, as we read the original statement, poverty, chastity, obedience, we didn't realize that we were taking a fourth vow. Because what Mother Macaulay asked us to do, poverty, chastity, obedience, service of the poor, the sick, and the ignorant. Well, once we got that in our head, we understood that we might be called to different ministries and went back for more education on scripture and so forth. And when you think about it, here I am, Sister of Mercy, Roman Catholic woman, teaching at a Protestant seminary. Now, in the day, that would have been, are you kidding me? During these times, and another interesting thing, the women's ordination office opened in Rochester, the first one, in the 70s, and it was at St. Monica's. So Rochester became sort of a center for the people wanting to look at the role of women in the church. And so during these times, scholars tried to bring a balance between women and men in our relationship with each other and in our relationship to Jesus. As well as, it wasn't just male and female, as well as it was how indigenous Catholics, how Hispanic Catholics, how Black Catholics understood their place in this Christian family. And in that process, many women had to struggle with their understanding of God and the image of God. I'll be honest with you to the core. When I stand and say the creed, I leave some words out. So John, okay. God is Father and Mother. God is a spirit. God is not sexual. And so as this movement began to come along, there was a desire for the women, feminine voices, to take a look at our faith and to look at the texts in ways they never looked at it before. And this is just the final part I want to do for introduction. I want to give you a couple of examples. Abraham is promised that he will have such a family that they will be chosen and numerous. but his wife is barren. And so she realizes that he wants a son. So Sarah grabs her slave servant, Hagar, and says, I want you to sleep with my husband. And Abraham agreed, and she produced a son, Ishmael. Well, Sarah was happy for Abraham, but a little jealous. And then God says to Abraham, you're going to have a family. He said, how can I? Well, then she bore Isaac. And she saw that her husband loved both the boys. And the boys were probably getting along. And Sarah is mad. So she tells Abraham to send Ishmael's mother away with the baby. And he did it. And so we just think, well, I'm glad he's got the son. I'm glad he's got the son. But how many of us think about that woman, Hagar? How many of us think about it? She takes that son and she goes into exile. And Sarah abuses her. So how do you think a black woman reads that text? A black woman who was used by her white master. Remember Strom Thurmond in the Senate? He had a child by one of the black women in his home. How do you think black women look at that story? Very differently than I would. And that's one of the big benefits of what happened after Vatican II. How do you think a foreigner like the Samaritan woman feels when she reads how Jesus respected that woman? Or how do you think the woman with the hemorrhage, which made her impure, how do you think she felt when she touched him and he took her hand and she was healed, touching the impure? So one of the wonderful things about Vatican II is that the whole population is increasing its knowledge and bringing its experience to the texts. And that puts a burden on a preacher. You know, I remember, this will be my last thing, and my dear friend Mary Eaton, God rest her soul, I almost jumped over the pew and went up to the priest and said, come on. In the resurrection accounts that we're going to hear from John, John is the only one that has somebody come to the tomb the next day, and it's Mary Magdalene. She's alone. And she looks in, and she realizes something has changed and runs and tells Peter and John, and they come. And they all go back home, and Mary stays, and she's the first one in John's gospel to encounter the risen Lord. Doesn't that say something? Oh, I should turn that off. Oh, it'll go off in a minute. I hate this thing. So today we're going to go to the, let me do this. Just as,
two at the crucifixion.
Pardon me, darling?
Wasn't Mary Magdalene, along with his mother, the last two at the crucifixion because all the disciples had disappeared?
Disappeared. We don't know for sure. We think so, but there's a big debate about whether Mary was there. John has her there, but John's written end of the first century. And one of the scripture scholars that I had a class with one day, she said, I doubt whether Mary could have made it because the trial was so rapid. And she couldn't have made that trip to be there. Let me just turn this thing off. Excuse me. There, okay. So now we're going to, does that answer your question, John? Okay. Now I'd like to turn to the gospel that you heard last weekend. And Rob preached on this, right? Aha. Okay, this is from John, the 8th chapter. Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. But early in the morning, he arrived again at the temple area, and all the people started coming to him. And he sat down and taught them. You know, that statement alone reveals so much that his popularity had increased. Then the scribes and Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in adultery and made her stand in the middle. They said to him, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the very act of committing adultery. Now in the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. So what do you say?" They said this to test him so that they could have some charge to bring against him. Jesus bent down and began to write on the ground with his finger. But when they continued asking him, he straightened up and said to them, "Let the one among you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." And again he bent down and wrote on the ground. And in response, they went away one by one, beginning with the elders. And so she was left alone. And the woman, he was left alone with the woman before him. Jesus straightened up and said to her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" "No one, sir." Then Jesus said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go, and from now on, do not sin anymore." What is your reaction to that gospel? You've heard it twice now. Sue. I know you're thinking, never mind, I'm kidding. What is your reaction? Yes, sir. I'm sorry, I was brought over. I'm so sorry, excuse me, forgive me.
You should have picked a woman first.
That's all right, honey. See, I'm really getting very mature.
But
Go ahead.
She didn't do it alone. So where's the guy?
There's the big question. And I hear that one of our preachers this past weekend asked that question. I don't want to mention Rob's name and embarrass him. Well, there's the question. But the question is more important in a way than the answer. Where was he? Do we ever ask any questions about her? Was this her full-time occupation? Was she married? Did she have children? Did she have a family? Was she used to trap Jesus? And did she understand that death was a punishment that she could receive? Most die if a man dies if he has sex with a married woman. But in this case, we don't know. We don't know. Was she set up? And I learned an interesting thing in preparing for today. Father McBride says, in the early versions of John's Gospel, this story didn't appear. It was later that it appeared because at that early church, penitential rites were so important. Some felt that Jesus was letting her off too easily. Isn't that interesting? She was letting her off too easy. Yes.
Isn't the point of the gospel, though, more not the specifics of that situation, but in that time, a woman would be punished for committing adultery, and yet the message is we shouldn't judge other people because we all have sinned.
Right. I think that's one of the powerful messages.
And whether it's adultery or anything else.
Yes. Yeah. I think that's one of the powerful messages of the text. But even before that, the fact that she was obviously set up. Somebody had to set the scene as somebody had to set the scene, because John says she was caught in the very act. So she was set up. She agreed to it, but she was set up.
Maybe they already killed the man, and this was then the after effects of it all. Yeah, I take the broader view of the message versus really digging into the details of where was the man and what was the act. And it was that Jesus was so, and God is non-judgmental in his love.
I think that's a very important thing to say. Here comes our pastor.
So, set up. We have no idea. But in that circle of people, what man had been with her in other situations and bring up, like, they caught her. Like, where were they? How'd they know what was going on?
Yeah.
Was this word of mouth? Were these other gentlemen part of the circle? And yeah, they didn't care about her. They were out to set up Jesus.
Yeah.
They didn't care about her at all.
No.
And I find that interesting. We'll never know. They caught her. So what were you doing? Nosy neighbors? What are you doing?
Or-
where you're hanging out? You know, give me a break here.
Or they paid off the man.
Yeah, I like, really. And
Money.
the other thing is, that I'm going to say at the end, you know, when he said, you that were without sin, okay, cast the first stone.
Stone.
What about all of us here this morning that are
Yeah.
sitting here in this chapel? Are we sinless? Are we
No,
making
just
any
kidding.
judgments going
kidding.
to anybody else? I mean, do we put things in other people?
Yeah.
I'm like, really?
Yeah.
Can we appreciate God's grace? Yeah, for me, but for everyone.
For everyone.
And why would we not want that to be given as a blessing?
Well, and it's, I never, thank you, Rob, I never realized that that was a whole new understanding for me, that it wasn't in the original John document, which says something about the community, the early Christian community. It was mercy versus misery. Here, yeah.
That phrase is, who is not, thou who.
Cast the first stone.
Oh, sorry.
I don't know.
You who have not sinned, or whatever it is, shall cast the first stone, because that's a very popular phrase.
Yes. I think that's, to my knowledge, Liz, that's the only place where it occurs. This story only occurs too in John. And he's speaking to a church that is growing, a Christian community at the end of the first century and the beginning of the second century. He's speaking to a community of new believers. Here, hold on, honey. Here comes the mic.
Is this the first time that Jesus actually says, your sin is forgiven and go and sin no more?
I'm not sure, Rob,
No?
pardon me?
It's elsewhere in Scripture.
Yeah,
Other people, moments. He forgives and says, go and sin no more. Yeah, it's not the first. John's more descriptive, though. John uses more descriptive language in his writings than the other three authors. So if you got the little black book during Lent, it talks about that. And I think maybe even today's reading was about that, how John is more descriptive about, talks about hyssop today and what that means. So if you have the book, visit it and check it out.
John's gospel is full of symbols because he's writing to a community that already believes, and he's trying to deepen the faith of those who are reading it. To me, the setup is part of the very painful thing, because that had to be deliberate. She was caught in the very act. To think, yes, Liz.
One of the parts of it that I've never understood, though, is how does Jesus not notice that everybody disappears?
Oh, I bet he does.
Nobody, but he asked her, oh, did they all leave? I'm just like, was he totally
Well, he was
spaced
down
out or
writing.
something? I mean,
According to John, he's down writing.
I know, but I guess I've not understood that part
But
of
that
it.
could be a statement of support to her. Have you noticed that they've all left? I'm not going to condemn you. And one thing I learned in preparing for today, that if they stoned her, Rome would be quite upset, because they're the ones that deal with those kinds of capital punishments. And what he wrote, I don't know. Maybe John is doing this symbolically to set the stage for what's going to come.
John said twice, in 5:14 and 8:11,
Go, okay.
Yeah, I never understood the
Yeah. Yeah.
I never understood the symbolism of him writing on the ground. What does that mean? He's not paying attention to them, or he's...
Well, it might be. I don't understand the symbolism particularly, but it's there for us to think about. It might give those who are accusing her time to rethink. He's not making a decision right away. Here, let's get the microphone, love.
I felt like it was like advertising. You know, you got the information right up there in the marquee, and everybody's going to get a chance to read it multiple times.
Okay. We don't know. Yes, hold on. Here, it's the mic.
I thought about that too, and I get hung up in the details. And I thought at the end of the scripture, it would tell you what he wrote in the sand, and it would like make the whole story make sense, but it never goes back to that. So then reflecting on that, I thought it's more of showing Jesus's calm through a situation that like they're looking for a reaction out of him, and he's still carrying on with what he's doing, waiting for him to like show some kind of emotion, and they're not going to get it out of him.
So that's one interpretation, that he's giving the crowd time to think about what's happening. It's interesting, though, and that's the power of the text, that we look at it and see what we think is happening. Rome, if they had stoned her, Rome would have been very upset, because that's their purview. That's their purview. Anybody else want to make a comment? Yes, I do. Okay, Michael. Oh, boy. The two bookends on either side of you.
Well, yeah. I think it's striking that Christ, I suppose I don't, that Christ assumed the good faith of the people standing there. In other words, all it takes one to throw the rock. And he's assuming they'll all behave appropriately, since none of them want to, in a sense, take the action that they've had no sin in the past, and so therefore they shouldn't, throw a rock at her. And so I think that it almost is quite an assumption on his part that all these, what would be characterized somewhat, inappropriate individuals would act in good faith and not stone her.
Yeah. Well, and he was giving them time I also think he was giving, this is one thought I have, giving them time to rethink what they had done and what they were expecting. Well, it would be if Jesus approved of the stoning, they'd have something against him. The religious leaders would have won the day. And so the question is, what is John trying to say to us in this gospel? And why wasn't it in the original text?
And I suppose on that note, everybody that was there had sinned, and yet they all engaged in appropriate behavior by not throwing a stone. I mean,
Yes.
that really, I think, depicts humankind.
Yes, yeah. Let you who are without sin cast the first stone. Well,
I mean, why didn't they decide to engage in another sin by casting the first stone?
yeah. Well, don't you think he caught them? He made them rethink what they had done.
It reminds me, and it has reminded me before, of the fabulous movie 12 Angry Men. They're all guilty. We are all guilty. I think that's part of the message that they're giving to us.
Okay.
Is that, in fact, the law of Moses?
Yes. Let me read to you
In
what.
other words, but you don't just pick on the woman. You got to stone both.
Not necessarily. Let me read you what, this is my dictionary of the Bible, what John Mackenzie says. In the Old Testament, the Hebrew morality of adultery rested on the primitive conception of the wife as property of the husband. Only the rights of the husband could be violated. Hence, illicit intercourse was not adultery if the woman were unmarried. So we don't know who here was married, or was she just grabbed to make the point? The wife and her partner could violate the rights of her husband, but the wife had no rights which the husband could violate. So a gospel like this today.
Doesn't that mean that she must have been married?
Well, that's the question.
No,
Or,
by what you just read there?
yes, but the question was, that I don't think the question was who was married and who wasn't. I think the question was if he forgave her. For some people, that would be too liberal. And for the scribes, if he said stone her, they'd have that against him. I don't think they were concerned about the woman at all. They wanted to make their point. It's a powerful text today. It's a powerful text today because we're rounding up people, men and women, without proof of their crime. And we're stoning them figuratively by sending them off to a third world country. And that's what Francis is saying. The woman caught in adultery is like men and women being caught today in what we consider an illegal action and being severely punished for it. And many have done nothing. Some have, and they should be called to account for that. So it's a text that I think for the religious leaders, as John presents it, it wasn't so much the law. It was they wanted to do something to put this preacher in place. His popularity was growing. And they thought, well, if he disobeys the law, we've got something on him. But that's not that's something that we see all the time, isn't it? You know, how we can go after innocent people to make a point. And we don't think about her. When he said, well, is there no one here to accuse you? Well, I don't, but he's clear. I don't want you to do this anymore. And you just think about, what was her life like after this? What was that like? And as they all went away without casting a stone, did that have an impact on them? What do you think?
Why do you always make it so complicated for us? Everything requires a judgment.
Well, just a thought. It's a thought to think. That's the thing about the text. John was very interested in symbols. And it's not so much he's lining up history, but he's interested in symbols. Because when you look at the beginning, signs and symbols, when you look at the beginning of John's gospel, the very first big sign is the wedding feast at Cana.
Yes.
And it shows you that he was embedded in his tradition. That Jesus was there with his family and his mother, and he understood what happens when wine disappears, how embarrassing that was. The wedding feast of Cana was the first big sign that Jesus was a Jew and loved his faith.
Coming out party.
Coming out party. But in other words, this is Barbara. I think he came, as he said, not to eliminate the law, but to perfect it, to fulfill it. I don't think he thought, well, I've got a new religion coming here, and I'm going to have a pope and bishops, and women will know their place, and I'll have a few good ones like Rob Borsey. But I think he was a faithful Jew who understood that the religious leaders had moved away from the care of individuals and got trapped in the legalistic end of the story. And that was too much for some of them because, you know, authority is a nice thing to have. Power is a nice thing to have. And when you experience it, you don't want to lose it. And then he goes on after the wedding feast of Cana. Then the next thing he does is he meets the Samaritan woman at a well. Well, what is he saying here? I'm here for Jews and Samaritans. I'm expanding my message. And each sign appears in John's gospel that he is reaching out and opening his arms wider and wider. Then we get the story of the man born blind, and people were saying, well, who sinned, him or his parents? And Jesus is saying neither. He's expanding the view that your disability is not the result of your sin, it's just because you're human. And then he visits Nicodemus, who comes at night, a Jew who says, I'm interested, but he comes at night. So there's a gradual unfolding in John's gospel of signs that the early church saw Jesus taking to enable his message to expand. First to the family at Cana, then to a Samaritan, then to a poor blind guy, then to Jewish leaders who came at night. And people were growing in their admiration and respect for him. And they were struggling with it too. Who really is he? And that's what the purpose of John's gospel is. A series of signs to show his arms got broader and broader and extended further and further. Is that helpful? it's a powerful gospel. Yes, Michael?
John, though, more or less emphasize or mentions on more than one occasion that the Jews are responsible for Christ's crucifixion. In other words, he seems to bring out and more comments about the Jews
Yes.
than any of the other Gospels.
Yes,
It's almost like he has a thing against them.
that, I think that could be true, yeah.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think,
Could be.
I think that we're into the first century now, and people have had time to reflect, and they look back at the arrest and the trial and the execution. And there was there has been in the Christian church for generations an anti-Semitic flavor that they did it. And it really wasn't the people as such. It was the leaders, it was Rome, and it's a much more complicated story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think they point to comments that
Yeah.
John makes in his
Yeah.
gospel
Yeah.
as evidence that
Yes.
know.
Yeah.
How do you think that ties into this story?
it doesn't.
Here comes my friend over here who skipped Bible study last week. No offense, just kidding.
Well, wasn't a very important aspect of Vatican II of changing the attitude toward the Jewish people? Because that was the anti-Semitism that started at the beginning of the 20th century was very profound, and
It goes back even further, yeah. And it is, yes, and that was one of the huge contributions of, and those of you here who are older, if you ever went to Good Friday before Vatican II, the prayer about the Jews was horrifically bad. And this Good Friday, when you hear it, it's tender, it's loving, and it's embracing. But anti-Semitism has been part and parcel of our Christian belief, faith, and action, I should say, action. Look at what a Christian nation in Germany did. I mean, I'll never forget the first issue of Life magazine that came out after the end of the war, and the cover was all the bodies at one of the prison camps. Yeah. My friend Mary Jo, who just buried her 102-year-old father, he was one of the liberators of one of the camps. Imagine what he saw as a 20-year-old man. You what, honey?
I don't think people even believed what they saw going through that, looking at those people and what had happened with them.
Well, maybe they had to save themselves.
Right.
It was so horrific.
Right.
And yet today there are people who still deny it. And it's history. Yeah. Wow. So the woman caught in adultery has something to say to all of us. Our behavior toward others, our judgment of others, and the mercy of God, the mercy and forgiveness of God. He said to her, come on now, don't do that anymore. And then also how we can use people to get our way. So, here we are. We've done the 4 Gospels. I think we can find the death and resurrection in this story very easily. And even for the religious leaders who walked away, maybe, we don't know, they had a change of heart. Wouldn't that be wonderful? But her Lenten experience, I can't imagine. Stephen was stoned to death.
Yeah, first murder.
And the Romans, crucifixion was a custom for them. They were the only ones that could do it. But sometimes they would line up people along a road and they'd all be crucified and set on fire. Terrible violence. Yeah. So we've done 4 Gospels. We've looked at the Lenten and the Easter experiences in each. Give me some feedback on, was this an approach that helped you or at least could help you in your dailiness?
But, you know, you mentioned, I wanted to mention to you, I think it was about the 3rd week or maybe the 2nd week, you and Father Rob both mentioned how you had misgivings over speaking out public on certain issues.
We talked about what a position preachers are in, yes.
Right. And I think you asked for comments. And I don't think I said anything, but I'll say it now, and that is, I think more people should speak out, including religious leaders. Mm-hmm. I think there's a lack of comment by our leaders as to what's going on every issue, including the migrants and the people that are being sent off to a prison in El Salvador that has 80 individuals in a prison cell with 2 toilets. I mean, that's inhumane. And we have no control. We're paying that government $6 million to house those people. And we have no control over trying to get someone back from that individual. I mean, that's ludicrous. Mm-hmm. And I just think there's such a silence on the part of all our leaders to what's going on there. And I would simply suggest that religious leaders as well should speak out. So that's my...
Okay. I sent this to your husband. I don't know if he got it or not. Her husband sent a letter to the bishop in Washington who spoke at the National Cathedral. And she asked the president who was there to have mercy on people. Well, she has paid a price. But in the recent issue of an ecumenical magazine called Christian Century, there's a picture of her, and she has received 200,000 letters thanking her. I was so proud the Sisters of Mercy of the Americas wrote her directly and thanked her for what she did. We need more of that. She's a graduate of the U of R. You got it. Yeah. Kathy Powers.
I would just like to add, and I don't quite know how to phrase this or say it, but I think we need to get balanced a little bit. We have a lot of tradition. The gospel gives us a lot of direction, but we somehow don't transfer it to all of our daily life. The issue we're talking about now happens to be one of those.
Yeah.
It's just kind of left floating out there for people to think about, and well, should I say something, shouldn't I? I don't know where that person is. You know, it might be reflection on me, it might be reflection on them. I just think there's some way that it has to come together. It sort of falls under that category, all are welcome. Well, you know, when we look at our church, that isn't necessarily true.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
And I think it's the same thing that fits this topic. I think you're absolutely right. We need to talk more about it in a way that is, you know, the facts. I mean, really, you can't dispute the facts.
The implication level which we fall down on. We talk a good game, but what do we do next?
Well,
I'm a Notre Dame graduate, and the most recent magazine cover of the Notre Dame magazine had a picture of the church, and it was empty. The pews were empty. There were a couple people, and it said, "The church is dying. I mean, people are leaving, and for Notre Dame to say that in their magazine is pretty,
Big.
that means it must really be happening. And I can't help but think that if there was, I mean, there's a host of reasons for that, but if leaders in the church were more vocal about some of these issues, and not afraid to speak on some of these issues, that could potentially change that trajectory.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, yes, Rosemary.
The youth, I mean, yeah.
The youth, yeah.
I'm reading a book now by Richard Rohr, The Tears of Things.
Say the
And-
title again.
Tears of Things.
Yes.
And it's given me a lot to think about. One of the things that Richard Rohr is saying is that we need prophets in our church. And he contrasts priests and prophets. And he says priests are to keep the community together, keep the organization going, whereas prophets challenge us to live a good life.
Thank you. There are a lot of challenges, aren't there? Especially these days. Well, here we are. First of all, Rob, I want to thank you for this opportunity you continue to offer me. Let's be honest here, there aren't many 91-year-old people that get an opportunity to continue to use their gifts. The check is in the mail. But I want to thank you, Rob, because for as long as I've known you, you have made efforts for women to give their gifts, and you've pushed the envelope, and I appreciate that.
Well, Barb, thank you, and thank you everyone who's participating again in this Lenten season. And I do take to heart and apologize if I've not been a great prophet or a voice, get intimidated by others in this time and age. It's something I take seriously and contemplate where my future is going ahead. Thank you, Barb, for being here. Appreciate it.
Thank you. If we were to do this again, and that's always an if, we don't know what God's got planned, what are some of the things that you would find interesting for us to delve into? We usually do this during these high preparation seasons. And I would be interested, what would entice you?
Continuing, in this day and age of what's happening in this nation and our world, where are we as church and voices in speaking up about the dignity and humanity of our sisters and brothers, not only here, all the issues that are going on, let's not be blind one another, what's happening in this nation and our world. I mean, even I got an Easter card from my friends in Australia this week, and they're like, Rob, oh my God, what is going on? I mean, what are you thinking about? Can we be voices and address it and not hide behind whatever we think we're hiding behind?
Yeah. Is Scripture something that, taking the text and presenting it in a context of the present, is that helpful? Okay, that's a good direction. Yeah. Well, we've got 6 minutes.
But Jeff, I do want you to, or you stay there, move closer there. I want you
to He was looking for a way to go. He wanted to leave early. Thank you. I want to thank you, all of you, those online, our dear Sisters of Mercy. You'd have to know some of them. There's one who's 101, and she's about this tall. And her name is Sister Raymond Joseph Griffith, and she was a music teacher. She is absolutely in love with the Buffalo Bills and absolutely in love with Ireland, and lived on Irish Hill. I don't know if she's watching today. Lived on Irish Hill in Corning. I might have told you the story. And the pastor of St. Mary's Church at Corning at that time was born in Ireland. And so he'd come over at noontime to sit on the front porch with her parents, probably hoping to be asked for lunch. But he'd say the Angelus with them in Gaelic. Think about it. And she is a gift. So many of our Sister Rose and so many of them, Dismas, who are 100 and over and still making a difference. So it's good. And I thank you for taking the time. I appreciate it, and I wish you a very blessed Easter. Thank you. And Jeff, I can't thank you enough, you and your dear family, for what you do. You make this available, and you try very hard. He said to me, I said, what am I going to do when the Lord says you can't drive anymore? He said, we'll come and do it at your house. I'm doing something that our pastor has invited me to do over the years. I set the stage for Good Friday. And this year it's at 2:30 at Transfiguration. Just a brief 35-minute introduction. No, just kidding.
Easter Vigil will be at St. Catherine, Siena. We have 5 wonderful people that are coming into the church. Yeah,
Nice.
They're wonderful.
That's nice.
I'm excited to be with them.
And I want to thank those who, thank you, Michael, for all the history we have.
What?
Thank you for all our history and
Our history. Well,
and for dragging your children here.
Oh, no, we're not dragged here. We're here for you, sister.
I insist on it. No, they enjoy it. And we really appreciate you so much, Sister. I think I've said before how I first met Barb when I was a little towhead.
About the size of the nun?
About the size. Is that Sister Dismas? No, Sister Dismas is still with us, right?
Yes,
Yeah. I think she worked with B.
yes,
On,
your wife.
They used to go into the one of those homes where the women were.
And they made the psychiatric center.
Yeah.
And they taught the women to sew.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think B would take the Honor Society girls from Mercy there to work with them.
Yeah.
And but yeah, I've known Barb since I guess I was about 5 when she came out to visit
Your sister.
my sister on Leadington Drive, 51
Yes.
Leadington Drive in Town of Gates. So I've cherished our friendship.
Me
ever
too,
since
Michael.
then.
Yeah.
Hopefully
And
we have a few
Beatrice,
years left.
his wife, was not only a great, was math, wasn't it? She was math?
Biology.
Biology, I'm
Yeah,
sorry,
he
science.
taught biology.
But she was a wonderful artist. Beautiful watercolors.
Yeah.
Well, here we are. I love you all and thank you, and have a wonderful holiday.
Thank you, sister.
Okay. Oh, I'm hoping so. I think I was going to have brunch, and my niece said, I'll have it at my house. And I said, great. Hallelujah. But somebody just gave me a $50 gift certificate at Tops. I said, take it.